Hello friends and welcome to Docsplaining. I'm Dr. Leah. Today you're going to be watching a conversation that I had with Racquel. She is someone that I know from Twitter. Her handle is at perspect_4_life, and she identifies as a pro-life advocate and also volunteers at an adoption agency. And here you will see our conversation regarding the truths surrounding adoption and where our common ground is between pro-life and pro-choice. Stay tuned after, because I'll be coming back with some research that I'm going to do right now on the web for adoption facts and where you can get more information. So I'll see you after. Enjoy. Hi.
Hello, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay and everything?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. I've just been having some issues lately, so I wanted to double check.
No, no worries. That's fine. Oh, you've got tea or something. I have too.
I have tea, yeah. It's my blueberry tea.
Very nice. Mine's I don't know, some sort of herbs and chamomile. I don't know.
Hey.
So thanks for coming on, and thanks for being willing to talk to me about things surrounding reproductive health and choices. Just give yourself like a quick introduction, just so that we can all be on the same page. I know we went over this before, but just so people know kind of who you are and what you're about.
So we kind of talked about how I got into pro-life activism and how I became concerned with reproductive health, women and children in our society and all that. I started volunteering at an adoption center about 2 years ago. So that was kind of my start. I've always been really interested in women's rights, children's rights, the way that women and children are uniquely tied together via biology, via societal norms, some of which, good and bad. We can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been interested in, I guess, human rights, what that means. I've kind of been all over the place in terms of the political spectrum. I've had earlier in my life, I was more pro-choice, and I've actually had a kind of a transition, so we can talk about that too, and what led me to transition. And currently, I am studying to become a mental health professional and work with. I want to focus on marriage and family therapy, and I predominantly want to focus on diverse family units, families that have adopted children, families whose children have special needs, all different kinds of families. I also am really interested in focusing on people who have substance abuse and how that impacts family dynamics. That's something that I'm also becoming more interested in as I'm going through the process of getting my degree. So yeah, that is how I got into the movement. I started getting into contact with other people on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have used social media to get in touch with people and share ideas, and that has been a really useful tool in learning different perspectives and having some really good conversations with people all over the spectrum when it comes to, reproductive choices and pro-life, pro-choice, and everything in between. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
Great, thank you. That's helpful because it gives us some idea of where you're coming from. And of course, I'm coming from I'm an OBGYN. I deal in the medical aspect of a lot of this, and I'm also involved in the advocacy and political advocacy aspect of this. And having been adopted myself, I do have sort of interest there because, I have that going on. And I understand that everybody's adoption story is different, and whether you're an adoptee or adoptive parents or someone who placed a child for adoption, those are all different sort of perspectives of maybe even one story, that could be happening. So I was curious about what your observations, and I know you're not like an adoption agent, but having been,
Yes.
yeah. So, but you work more in the field than I do. I mean, I am involved in the patient care, but then that's kind of where that stops. Do you have any perspective about, or opinions just in general? Our adoption system here in the U.S. is not awesome, is my understanding. And there is a lot to be said about it's really expensive, and not everyone who wants to adopt children can adopt children. We have a lot of kids in foster care. Can you, and without, I mean, that's, I'm sure, an hour conversation in and of itself, but like, this is sort of a call to what should we be paying attention to and how can we make things better? So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so you're right. That is a complicated question. There are lots of different facets. I think just like most systems in our country, there are some really positive things, and then there are also some things that need to be improved greatly. And I think the adoption system is no different. I think some things that we do need to really work on is the aspect of how much adoption costs, which you brought up. For a private adoption, which I think the right kind of get in touch with on both sides. So the mother, a lot of the times, wants to be able to have a say in who is going to be adopting her baby. Maybe if that person is married or not, or what that kind of income that person has, what kind of faith or religion their child is going to be raised in. So I think that's something that when women are giving their children up for adoption, they like to have some say in that, and that's important for them. On the other side, people are often wanting to adopt children who are younger, who are newborns, who don't have any serious health issues. These are all things that people consider when they're adopting. And, we can understand why people care about these things, but then that leaves, like you said, a lot of older kids who are in the foster system without any prospect of being adopted, which is really sad and unfortunate, because oftentimes those are the children who, when you're a really young infant, and I'm sure you know this, and we learn about this in psychology, there's still a lot of time for you to develop healthy attachments to caregivers. But when you're an older child and you have not had those kinds of attachments, the emotional difficulties you're going to face in life become more intense. And as you get older, it gets a little bit harder to manage those things. Not that there isn't any hope, and not to say that children who are older in the foster system can't develop healthy relationships later on.
No, of course
it just more of a struggle. So that's an issue that I see, is that while we understand why people have these certain maybe ideals when they go into a situation, it does unfortunately leave a lot of kids kind of in the background.
Right.
So that's probably one of my biggest concerns. It's also pretty expensive, especially if you go the private route. I think a lot of people see adoption as more of this like bougie thing that wealthy people can do and afford. And I think something that we really need to work on in society is making it more affordable, kind of making it less taboo that you have adopted a child or that you've given a child up for adoption. I think those are all factors. Another thing that's really interesting is I've noticed, just from talking with adoption counselors, because I'm really interested in what they do, is women who come in to give their children up for adoption. A lot of times they have support from their partners, but a lot of times they don't. So women are essentially going at this alone, and they're making these really life-changing, serious decisions all by themselves, oftentimes without a strong support system. And I think that really impacts people's experience. So I'd say that's another thing that I've noticed. And that ties into other aspects. But yeah,
Sure.
so those are my observations.
And so, I mean, when, and of course I hear online, don't, don't have an abortion, give the baby up for adoption. But then how do you reconcile that sort of attitude, which sounds very sort of cut and dry, like this is so easy, but it's not, right? How do you reconcile that approach with, we have so many kids in foster care and they get older and they're just kind of stuck in this horrible system and it's expensive to adopt a child. There are many loving couples who are ready to adopt, but then people who are placing children for adoption are like in a catalog going, nope, nope, nope. Like, how, like, it infuriates me to a certain point because it's not, abortion is an alternative to pregnancy. Adoption is an alternative to parenting. Like, to place a baby for adoption, you have to go through a pregnancy and give birth and all that. So to me, they're apples and oranges. But how, as someone who, and I'm gleaning on the pro-life end of the spectrum here, how do you reconcile that sort of attitude with, but we have such a messed up system as it is? Can you speak to that as just personally, not like,
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think, and this is something I wanted to talk to you about, I think in general, my biggest issue when we're talking about like pro-life, pro-choice on both sides of the spectrum is honesty and being truthful about the reality of what pregnancy is, what adoption is, what a fetus is. All of these things, we have to be honest about it, and we have to talk about it in a way that isn't oversimplifying, but also isn't overly maybe dehumanizing or one-sided, because it is really complicated. And I'm glad you brought that up because it is true. So I think part of the solution, and this is why I am going into the mental health field, why I'm going into working with families and women and children, is because we need a change in the system. We need, on a mass level, ideally on a mass level, there would be huge systemic changes surrounding the adoption system, the foster system, healthcare, all of these things. They all tie together. So it's really not just one thing. It's a lot of complicated parts that are impacting each other that make these situations very complex. I think when I look at these situations, and I think my psychology background influences a lot about how I look at these things. So we look at things from a biopsychosocial model. So we look at how biology impacts people's lives, how their psychology impacts their lives, how society impacts people's lives. And I think in all of these ways, there are improvements to be made on the adoption front. So, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, but it's hard to answer it in one quick question.
Absolutely.
I think from a societal standpoint, again, we need to make adoption. I think a lot of people don't think of adoption as something that they would consider in most normal family planning situations. People don't consider it. And I think my hope is that changes going forward, that people recognize that there are so many children in the foster system who are in need of love, support, resources. And if you are planning on having children, and maybe if you can't have children, or maybe if you already have children, but you can, seriously consider adopting. I think that would be something that on just a cultural level, I hope that it becomes more normalized and something that more people consider as a valuable part of family planning. also on a social level, we have the LGBTQ community who in so many states are denied the right to adopt children. And that is essentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of couples who could provide children with loving, supportive homes who can't because of these restrictions. And it blows my mind because these children, it's either they live in the foster system, they live in this system where they have no stability, they have no home, or they live with a really wonderful, loving, non-heteronormative couple. And I just feel like there's so many benefits that we could reap if we were more accepting of the LGBTQ community adopting. So that's on a social level, I think, some things that need to change. And then, like you said, it shouldn't be more expensive to, get an abortion than it should be to do an adopt. Like, these things shouldn't be so astronomically different, and the resources that we devote to these things, I think, should be a little more even. And I think in our society, they're not currently.
No,
and I
they're
think
not. I can tell you they are not.
And I think that's something we can definitely work on and fight for in a political sense and an economic sense.
But for me, I don't see, and of course you have a different perspective being in it, I don't see a lack of awareness or rather a lack of social acceptance for me. And I'm adopted, right? So this is something I don't really go around talking about. I don't have a t-shirt that says I'm adopted, but it's something that will come up in conversations. And if it does, it's kind of like no big deal. I don't see it so much as an awareness thing or if more people thought about it as an option thing. For me, I feel like it's a traumatic thing that is actually a lot to ask of somebody. And I've heard this from other people who also work in the adoption field, that it's not all rainbows and kittens, right? In the scenario of someone with a pregnancy that they didn't plan or they don't want, do I continue it and give birth and then parent, or do I continue it and give birth and place for adoption, or do I have an abortion? I mean, psychologically, the abortion might be the easiest, less stressful, less affecting of mental health, maybe, depending. But I also think that there's a lot to be said about what you're asking of someone when you say, place the baby for adoption. I mean, don't you think that's probably something, in the great scheme of things?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we need to consider and we need to be honest about. I think that, so I actually have, anticipating our conversations, I've watched a lot of the videos you've made. I've read a lot of the articles you've written. I figured just to be informed about what your thoughts are. And you had this, and there were lots of things I agreed with, lots of things I didn't agree with. But one thing that you said that I really agreed with is that women who give birth, we should be throwing them parades. Like, it is not an easy feat. And something I really don't like within the pro-life community is when we minimize that experience and when we don't accurately talk about what that is like for women in our country, around the world. I think we need to be honest about it. It is difficult. It is a very serious, life-changing thing that women go through. And I don't think we should skip around that at all. I think the issue comes into play whereas if you do think when women are pregnant that there is another human life involved, you are trying to balance these two things that you think are really important. At least for me, that's what it comes down to. I'm trying to balance the life of a woman who I think has rights and dignity and deserves care and support and love. And I'm also trying to balance another life that I think is valuable and deserves dignity, care, and love. And so we're trying as best I can to find options that would, in the best way possible, be a situation where a woman could go forward and live and thrive and be happy and okay and fulfilled, and also the offspring can go forward and live and be happy and thrive. So I totally agree with you. I think that adoption is not easy. um, Another thing that is flawed within the adoption system is that a lot of times there is no counseling or therapy that is given to women after they place their children up for adoption. It's kind of like, all right, you did it. If you need anything, call, like, and I feel like it's, first of all, therapy is expensive if you don't have insurance. Second of all, it's kind of, just giving your child up for adoption and expecting it to kind of be normal and neutral. It's like you just went through a life-changing experience. That's a very serious thing, and there should be professionals and more access to mental health care professionals and doctors. You just went through labor and childbirth, who can assist these women who go through these things. So that's another facet. But I definitely do care about the mental health of women who give their children up for adoption. It is something that is serious, and we need to help treat, for sure. So
Right. And I appreciate your saying that, because that is something that grates on me, especially, and I see that it grates on you when it's pregnancy and birth is just something you do. And it's so not. Like, it's such a huge thing. It is something I don't ever want to do because it's such a huge thing, right? So, and there are people like me out there who don't want to get pregnant and don't want to give birth. Um, I
and I
think,
do believe someone who never wants to be pregnant will never become pregnant. That is the hope. That's the hope
right,
that I have for every person who doesn't want to experience that. I would never wish pregnancy on someone who doesn't want to be pregnant.
right.
The
And
hope is that there are measures that people can take that significantly decrease the chance that they will ever have to be pregnant if that's something that they absolutely really don't want to do.
and
And
we
that's I fully support.
right. And I think that that's the reasonable approach, right? That's the and we also have to acknowledge that all of those steps that we take aren't 100%. Life does find a way sometimes. And that's actually how I counsel my patients when I talk about tubals. When I tell them, okay, you want to be sterilized, awesome, I will do that for you. There is a very small chance that at some point you still may get pregnant. Now, obviously, the whole point is for you to not, but nature can find a way. So just know that. And if so that is the thing. But I think that we have to be realistic as well with that and understand until we have some sort of, I just don't even, because with sterilization, that's about as close to perfect as you can get until we can, like, I don't know.
Like a hysterectomy, which would not be recommended unless, it was like you had cancer or something really
Right.
serious.
And that's a whole different thing. And then you're talking about major surgery just for one of the people, right? That's a major operation for someone to undergo with, yeah. So we want every pregnancy to be planned. We want, therefore, because if it's planned, chances are it's desired. And things happen in this life where people have children and they can't take care of them and they go into foster and hopefully they're adopted, and we all understand that. But I think that we have to acknowledge that people are going to have sex. People are going to take every precaution. Even doing so, they'll get pregnant. And then what? And I think this is where you and I find our common ground, is that we would love to see those scenarios where, unfortunately, through the Swiss cheese model, like all of the security blanket, it just, something zigged when it should have zagged, ended up pregnant, they didn't want to be. But what we would love to see is them having actual resources to make the decision that is right for them. If that decision is going through a pregnancy, placing for adoption, that they have that support going through that process. They have the postpartum care going through that process. They have the mental health care during and after that process. And I think that we just don't, I think a big part of why we don't do that is, A, we're talking about women. Let's just be honest. And by women, of course, I'm being cisnormative, but those with uteruses. And therefore, in our society, we just, as we've seen, don't value women as much as we should. We need to value girls' education. We need to value women and their autonomy and see that, yeah, biology is a little bit sexist because only one of the two can get pregnant. That's unfair. As a feminist, that's like totally not equal. That's no one asked me if that system was okay. But here we are. And so to have those resources available instead of, well, you're a woman, pregnancy is just what you do. I mean, I think that's again kind of wrapping up where you and I have that common ground.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely think that, women in our society, this leads me into something that I wanted to talk to you about. So I was reading
Racquel?
one of your, oh, sorry.
Say that one more time because you paused and went out, so just, and you wanted to talk to me and go.
Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about what you just said leads me into an article that I read that you wrote about pregnancy being a medical condition, I think is what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And you make some really good points as to why we need to consider it a medical condition, and why for some women in our society it is a super serious and sometimes potentially deadly experience. And so something that I think is really interesting is, when we talk about, things being unfair and things being unequal for men and women. I totally get what you're saying about it's unfair that women can give birth and that men can't, and we didn't consult each other. Yes, I get that. It's a burden that we bear that men do not. At the same time, I feel like I wonder a lot of the time why it is a burden. And obviously there are biological reasons. It's difficult on your body. Your body goes through so many changes. You can't drink, you can't just do whatever you want. There's a whole list of biological factors. But another aspect that I think is really significant is the social reasons why pregnancy is an unfair burden on women in society. And I think you and I will both agree that those are things we should be working to alleviate. Something that we talk a lot about in one of my classes in grad school it's for my psychopathology class. And we talk about the difference between like a pathology, a disease of the brain, versus someone who is dealing with mental illness due to trauma and environmental factors that have caused this person to be struggling in the situation that they're in. And we point out this distinction because the way you treat, the way you prevent, and the way you work with people who have these are both serious conditions. One isn't more or less serious than the other. They're both very serious, but the way you deal with them is going to be kind of different. And so when we think about pregnancy, I think a lot of the time there is a tendency to on both ends. On one end, there's a tendency to pathologize it, to say it's inherently, this like disease-like thing that happens to women. And then on the other end, like you've said, there's this tendency to be like, oh, it's just easy. It's like, going to the bathroom. It's no big deal. Those are both kind of not the full picture. And so something that I really am passionate about is understanding the ways in which society potentially is causing a traumatic or toxic environment for women to be women in, to be pregnant in. The normalization of the male body over the female body, the total lack of paid maternity leave, and this idea that women who give birth, they're the ones who are automatically going to stay home and be the primary caregiver. All of these things, I think, contribute to why so many women are afraid of being pregnant or dealing with it. And I think those are at least things we can change. We can't necessarily change our biology unless, we can do some things. but we can combat the ways in which society is creating a toxic environment for women to be pregnant in. And that's something that I'm really passionate about doing.
And I wholeheartedly agree. I
Yeah.
just, a few months ago or whenever it was, who knows, my Senator Hatch, Orrin Hatch of Utah, was quoted in our paper as saying breastfeeding in public is disgusting and that should be not allowed. And it's like you create a society, and then what by society I mean specifically here in Utah, but also elsewhere, right? Where women are supposed to give birth and have lots of kids and breastfeed because that's the healthiest thing because of immunoprotection. I'll just throw that little caveat in there. And those who can't breastfeed, sadly, are actually shamed by society, and they should not be. If they choose not to breastfeed, they should not be shamed, that whole thing. But anyway, we are in this not protected world where if you are pregnant, you could lose your job, you don't get access to your doctor whenever you need to because you could lose your job, you might not be able to get childcare while you're going to your appointments. Like all of these things for supporting a healthy pregnancy and a healthy child and therefore a healthy family, breastfeeding while you're at work, having that maternity leave, having paternity leave, having that support at home, we don't do, and then we're upset because people are breastfeeding. Like I don't understand when we are so harsh to pregnant people and then we're upset if they don't want to be pregnant, right? Like, and they don't want to go through that process. I think we can do better.
For sure. I totally agree. And the whole not being able to breastfeed in public, and then you turn around and there's a super hypersexualized image of women's breasts, but if a woman is feeding her baby, she's dirty and gross, and it just absolutely makes it's very confusing. And there is so much I see as someone who considers myself, I know this might be an oxymoron, a pro-life feminist. I do consider myself someone who deeply cares about women's equality and empowering women and not shaming women for the biological functions of our bodies that we don't have say over, we don't have control over. And it's like, okay, so what do you want me to do? Would you rather I have an abortion? Would you rather I not be breastfeeding my child? It puts us in this impossible situation. And as someone who myself, so I'm very close with my mom, and I have a desire to have children one day. I do. And I think that kind of plays into it for me. But I also am a very career-oriented person. Like, I have a lot of passion for helping my community. I'm very interested in mental health and helping women outside of my family and in the community. And so I get so frustrated when people say things to me like, "Oh, well, how are you gonna do both? Like, how are you gonna be a mother and then have a career?" And I just sit there and I'm like, I wonder if they would ever ask a man this question. I wonder if they would ever ask a man, "Oh, how on earth are you going to be a father and
go to law school? How are you going to do that?"
Yeah, no one asks
Nope.
men that question. And I think that it's things like that frustrate me because obviously if I'm going to have children, I want to be a good mother and I want to be there, but also my plan is to have a partner who's going to be in it with me 50%, and it should be just as much on him as it is on me. And so it's things like that I think are creating it's kind of like a toxic culture for women, a male normative culture, and I think I would really love to see a big shift in how we talk about things, the healthcare we have, the way society is set up,
Right.
So.
And if, staying at home with children is so important, why do we have so many families that need two incomes in order to survive? Like, I was raised by babysitters, and I think I turned out okay. I love my parents. Like, there's that fear of if you're not home with your kids, they're gonna turn out bad. I don't know. So, but then don't, on the same side, on the opposite side of the coin, the economy the way it is, or whatever level of education you have, if you're having children young and you can't achieve your education, and then you can't have the higher income, but you need two incomes for your like
Right.
they just fight each other. And if we actually had a welcoming to families support in our society where we said, oh, you want to go to college but you have two small children at home, well, here's our like here's an affordable daycare service, and this is how we can do, like, let us help you and make all of those resources happen. We don't have those security nets in our government system. They exist elsewhere in the world, but here in the US, we don't have that. And I think that until we can say everyone can and does have children when and if they want them, because we have all of these things, we're not valuing women. We're certainly not valuing their children, and that I think needs to change.
Yes, I definitely agree. And I know this saying is kind of cliche, but I think it's very true that it takes a village to raise children and to have, the next generation of humans be taken care of in our society. And another thing, kind of going off of what you were saying, is this this is something I notice, and I feel like when it comes to feminism, there are some different ways to look at things, but just hear me out. A lot of times when we talk about kind of like the history of human civilization, we talk about all these accomplishments that men have had. And I'm not trying to diminish some of the things that men have done. Surely they're important. But it's like women have given birth to every single human who has walked on the planet. Women for thousands of years. And if you know how hard pregnancy is and you know what women go through, like the amount women have contributed to society and the continuation of human beings and making sure that children are cared for, which, by the way, is not inherently degrading. And I don't like when people talk about child rearing as like a degrading thing. I think both men and women, it's a very valuable thing to do in our society. And I get frustrated when there is so much praise for kind of these male-dominated accomplishments, this idea that power and accomplishments is conquering different countries and, having the most money and ruling over people, and we don't give that same kind of praise and historical reverence to all of the women in our society who have essentially been the backbone, and without them our civilization wouldn't continue. And I know that's like me getting real nitpicky, but that's another thing I noticed, and kind of like that's seen as like a degrading thing. Like it's seen as not as important when there would be no human civilization without what women have done. And a lot of times we have sacrificed in ways that men can't even imagine. They'll never experience.
And then, and of course, there's also the praising of the fathers who help. And it's like,
yeah, that
good
they're
job.
babysitting.
Yeah, like, good job for being a dad. Like, isn't that like what? I'm not getting a pat on the back for the, like, come on, you're the dad. Like, this is your job. It's no praise. It's just like, thank you. I mean, and thank me and thank you.
Right.
I do want to hear about, because the whole so it does take a village. There is a reason that's a saying, and I think that anymore, if you think back to even recently in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when our parents were growing up, or our grandparents or whatever, and they left the doors open and the kids were outside playing, and then when the streetlights came on, they came home, and Susie and Billy's parents knew each other and knew to call there was a connectedness that doesn't really exist anymore. And now we're afraid to let our kids walk to school alone. We're afraid to let them go to the park alone. And what does that say about our society when we can't trust each other to help each other? I mean, it just goes to show, like, that's another mark in the belt of we're not, and of course, we are not interested in raising other people's kids. Well, I am, because other people's kids are going to take care of me when I'm old and in the hospital. I'm going to need some of those kids being doctors and being well educated to take care of me. So I am interested in taking care of other people's kids.
And you see that as an investment. Like, I think society, where we are viewing children as burdens as opposed to things that humans we need to invest in, and it's for the benefit of all of us. When we have healthy children, when we have healthy families, when we take care of our children, and that includes having healthy, happy mothers who also feel like, their identity isn't just being a mom, and they can, do other things that they enjoy, and their life isn't over just because they had a child. That shouldn't be. Those are things that are really, I think, will negatively impact our future, which is unfortunate.
Absolutely. I think I want to just take a moment and just say, wow, we have lots of common ground, despite your identifying being pro-life, my identifying being pro-choice. I do want to hear the pro-choice to pro-life movement, and the pro-life feminist is a mystery to me. I am going to admit it. I think, though, I want to do that in another... Say that? Oh, you get that all the time? Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure certainly not the first one. So, but I do want to, I want to end this here, and we can put a pin in that for hopefully another time, because I would like to do this again. I don't know if you would like to do this again. I know we didn't solve any world mysteries, but I think I enjoyed hearing your perspective. I think it's going to be important for people either who are like-minded like me or are not like-minded like me to hear you speak to these points as well. And I think that way we can all come together maybe a little bit closer as a society and get some good work done. I don't know.
I hope so too, and I would definitely be up for talking again. But before we go, I did want to, that what you just said reminded me of something that I kind of wanted to touch on as a common ground thing to talk about. So when you initially reached out to me, and I was initially thinking about, putting myself out there and talking to you, I'm not gonna lie, I was really nervous. And I was like, you just go on social media and you see how mean people are to others. And I see how cruel people are to you. I see how cruel people are to my other pro-life friends. And it's kind of scary. And so I was like, do I really want to do this? I was really, really thinking about it. And then I was looking at your stuff, and I saw that you went and you did, like, you spoke at a church and you were talking to people, and I was like, you know what? I was like, Leah puts herself out there all the time, and people are really, really mean to her. And if she's willing to do that, then I should do it too. If I feel passionately about this, if she's willing to do it, then I should too. And it kind of gave me like the boost I needed to feel brave enough to come and talk to you, because I'm like, here, this person is putting herself out there. She's willing to talk to people who she doesn't agree with, even when people call her these really cruel, mean things, and they just label her as just an evil person without understanding the complexity of these issues. I was like, all right, well, I have to step it up too. So,
well, I thank you very much for that. That was very generous of you, and I'm humbled. I appreciate the trust that you've shown. I think that's where we have to start, right? As human beings, we could be in a bus full of strangers, and if there's a car accident, I think it's just our instinct, and we don't care what background that person has. We're going to help them get out of the bus, and I think that's where I'd like us to be. I'd like us to start from that kind of gut feeling, and it's hard to get people there, right? But I think we can do it. So I really appreciate your saying that. That's very nice.
I think we both want to solve a lot of issues, and we care about women a lot. I certainly do. And I feel like we live in a time, unfortunately, where we're very demonizing of people who have different beliefs and different opinions. And I think that's very unfortunate because it's this myth that people are just good or evil, that they're just evil people and then there are just good people. And I think to me, that's like such little self-reflection of people realizing the complexities within themselves and then the complexities within the world. So I'm very willing to talk to you. Anyone who comes to me in a respectful way, even if we really disagree on something, I am making it a goal of mine to talk to them.
That's great.
Yeah, because talk to each other. So, yeah.
It is important that we talk to each other. Well, thank you again so much for your time and your energy and your trust. I really appreciate it. Let's email and let's decide on another time to chat about feminism, what it means to you, what it means to me, what all this is about. But I think that would be great.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Well, take care, Racquel. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Bye. Have a good night.
You too. Hello, and welcome back. I just wanted to give you a few resources if you wanted to look into the adoption system in the United States on your own time and see what's going on. A few things I want to point out. This is a report that you see on my screen from fiscal year September 2016 to 2017. So these are as of September 30th, 2017. Real quickly, this is again from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The number of children in foster care for that year was just under 500,000, and that's up from just under 400,000 in 2012. So we're going up in the number of kids in the foster care system. That's problematic for so many reasons. As you heard us talk about, there are problems within the system, problems with those who are qualified and want to adopt but can't, if they can't afford it or the state laws don't let them. There are lots of issues that we should be working toward fixing as a society. If we're looking, for example, just scrolling down, children entering the foster care system was 273,539. Why was that happening? The top 6 reasons are right here. Neglect, drug abuse of the parent, caretaker's inability to cope, physical abuse, child behavior problem, which, as we know, can stem from initially being in the system in the first place, as well as housing. Those are all issues that we should be looking at to remedy. We should be working together as a society for the sake of our children, ensuring that they have a safe, loving, stable environment to grow up in. This should be top priority. When people get so upset about what someone's doing with their pregnancy, they should be looking at this first, because we have 500,000 kids who need our help in this nation alone. I encourage you to look up local adoption laws. For example, in the state of Utah, I cannot adopt a child. Legally, I'm not allowed. I have an education. I am a good person. I've never committed a felony. I have a pretty decent job, stable household. Yet I, by law, cannot adopt a child because I'm not married. Also, the state of Utah seems to have precluded gay couples, same-sex marriage, from the ability to adopt children. Statistically speaking, and no one wants to hear this, but the majority of neglect and abuse of children comes from heterosexual couples. Yeah. That's a fact. Children need safe, loving, stable environments, regardless of the genders of their parents. Why are we not working to fix this? Why are people not protesting adoption agencies or the legislature about how they make it so hard for people to love and care for and provide for these children? We should be fighting that before we have anything to say about what someone does with their pregnancy, if they have an abortion or if they continue it. That's a whole nother ball of wax. We could do a lot more for our pregnant people. We know that. That's a whole nother video I've done, and people who know me on Twitter know I talk about it a lot. What about the children? Do something. Don't say, don't have an abortion, and then say nothing about the 500,000 kids who need our help. This was an article brought to my attention in the Brainchild magazine. It was published in 2013. It tells heartbreaking tales of neglect and abuse of children who have been adopted. One famous case where a woman sent a little boy on a plane with a tag around his neck back to Russia saying, I can't take care of the kid I adopted anymore. There are countries who won't allow U.S. citizens to adopt children from their country because we treat children so badly. What is wrong with us? We need to do something. This coming election, I would ask your legislators who are on the ballot, what are you doing about our children in foster care? What are you doing about the education system? What are you doing to help our future by caring for the children that we already have? I will see you next time. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.